so very much. And I love the fact how you connected it all through what made you to become an activist. And I also feel like regardless of what we study, everyone is needed in the fight against the climate crisis. It's a diverse kind of movement. And so just to dive into the experience that you have, that what are the solutions or the research that you've come up with over the years that we could implement in those related issues on food insecurity right now that is happening in different nations as it is right now, even with the clashes or the war between the Russian and Ukraine that leads to food insecurity and a lot. So what do you think are the research out there that you have done, or the solutions that are available that we could, adapt or adopt to different countries?
I think what's clear is when we look at food security is there's two aspects of it. One is the food production, and one is people's ability to access food. And then, maybe there's a third angle, which is whether people are healthy enough to actually, they've got healthy enough bodies and they've got a situation where they can have sort of health and sanitation to prepare food in a healthy way, so their bodies can actually absorb the nutrients. And so when we tackle food security, it's really important that we don't just look at production, important as it is, but we also look at what we might consider access to food. And so on the one hand, we know that in low and middle income countries, we know in many African countries, farmers are tackling with multiple problems. So they're tackling with generally degraded soils, they're tackling with very high cost of fertilizer, and then they're tackling with climate change, which could be making the situations they're having to deal with increased heat, which is problematic for their crops, increased drought, even changes in pests and diseases. I think one area that is being worked on that's really important is what might be called regenerative agriculture. So really working to regenerate the soils so that they're more resilient. Of course, looking at resilient crops. But then if we flip to the access side that I've been looking at a lot, it's how do we protect people and ensure they have greater food security when there are shocks? So we've seen frequently, it doesn't matter if the shock is in an African country or if the shock, for example, in 2008 was in Australia, with such interconnected global food systems, we need to protect people when there's a shortage of food and prices go up. And what we've seen in our recent work is if we look at somewhere like Ethiopia, the government was sort of very rapid, well, had quite a good program in terms of offering safety nets, some food safety nets, but even cash safety nets. So safety nets work. Encouraging people to save works. And I know that might sound silly when we're talking about very poor people, because the poorest people tend to be the most food insecure. But it turns out that if people are given the ability to save even just a little bit each month, it can really help with their food security. And the same with farmers, actually. The data suggests that farmers who are actually able to store some food, they again are more likely to deal with food security, even if they're storing the food so they can sell it later, so they can afford to buy other food. And I think the other thing we're sort of concerned a little about is not just access to enough calories, which of course is important, but whether people can afford to have a varied healthy diet, so that you get enough fruits and vegetables. And again, there our biggest concern is when there's a weather shock and the price of food goes up, and it's just very hard to afford. So safety nets are absolutely critical. And then trying to build some kind of resilience in food systems. So it's one of those difficult situations, which is if you're highly dependent on domestic production, then you're highly at risk of domestic shocks. If you're highly dependent on imported food, then you're highly at risk of shocks from outside. But there's a general feeling that certainly countries need to be a little bit more food self-sufficient, where they're highly dependent on imports, because we need more resilient food systems. And probably, I mean, I don't have data to prove this, but probably we need more regional cooperation, so that what we see at the moment is when there's a food shock and a price shock, a lot of countries are tempted to put export bans on. So people see that food's going to be sort of harder to find, so you put an export ban on, so you can't export food. But what actually happens is everyone seems to get harmed by that. So some more regional cooperation about when one country has a shock, if there's more systems to ensure that food is still actually able to be exported from one country to another. So there's no simple solutions, I think. There's a lot of parts of the puzzle that we need to sort of go right from food production and the quality of soils through to when there is a shock, can we make sure that people can actually afford food?
Thank you.